Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Outmarket.pro podcast. I'm your host, Mark Stein. On this podcast, I usually interview small business owners and other industry professionals about their experiences, passions, and insights. And today's guest is a franchise consultant, Mike Martuza. After years of experience as an executive at Fortune 500 companies and founding an internet content company, Mike now uses his skills to help guide other aspiring entrepreneurs into finding the right franchise fit for them. He's also, however, very passionate about coffee, and this came up in a conversation recently. He serves on the board of directors for Lens Coffee, Len''S. So I'm looking forward to hearing about his passion for coffee and just getting some information about it. Nice diversion from our usual topics. So welcome, Mike. Glad to have you.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start at the beginning of your passion for coffee. What age were you when you first drank your first cup of coffee?
This is kind of a two-part answer to this. I mean, obviously, because my parents drank coffee, I tried coffee at various points in my younger years. Hated it. Didn't drink it for decades. Thought it was acidic, vile. Couldn't give it to me for free. But my recent passion for this actually sort of stems out of my involvement with Lens Coffee starting about 10, 12 years ago. And essentially what it ended up happening was I went to a seminar that was being run by Lens Coffee about different types of coffee from around the world. And we'll get into more of this later, but in some of the samples that I tried, it was like, oh, wow, now I understand why people like coffee. And it became one of those things where I went from not wanting to touch it whatsoever to actually really enjoying it. And it was just a matter of the type of bean that was being used in making the coffee. And we'll talk more about different bean types later too, I'm sure.
So is Lens Coffee a franchise of yours that you consult with? Is that how you came upon them?
No, actually, I found Lens Coffee initially through a Groupon coupon. And
Okay.
again, I was not drinking coffee at that point in time because I didn't like it. But saying that there has to be something about coffee that, why is it appealing to everybody essentially but me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I'd go and try to get some education. So I sat in this seminar, and what I discovered is coffees are a lot like wine in terms of their variance and complexity and terroir and and just characteristics. And just because I didn't like the coffees that I was drinking or trying to drink when I was younger, I understood why I didn't like them and why I do like what turned out to be turned into a passion of mine, saying that I liked the coffee. I saw an opportunity in the business and talked to Len, who is the proprietor and CEO, about investing and trying to help them grow the business.
Nice. So how should we start? And I was equating this to wine. I think now that craft beer is so huge nationally, there are connoisseurs of beers
Mm-hmm.
in the same way, and probably, well, yeah,
If
bourbon drinkers, lots of spirits have their following, don't they?
Absolutely, but if you take it beyond that, chocolate is actually the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Different chocolates, different grown in different places and processed differently, have remarkable different profiles to them.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's like bourbon or single malt whiskey. It's like wine. It's like chocolate in terms of their nuances and flavors that are not flavors, but characteristics that appeal to some people and not so much to others.
Mm-hmm. Let's later in the podcast, let's equate to me, chocolate and coffee sort of go together, um, and both coming from a bean. Anyway, let's draw
And by the way,
similarities there.
they grow together as well, same region, basically the same belt around the world. You know, what I'll refer to here is the coffee belt that circles the world, meaning that is it's the right amount of sunshine, right weather conditions, and other things to grow premium coffee.
And
So
so,
chocolate grows in the same region.
okay, got it. All right. So, this is such a new topic for me. I know zero about it. And it's one of the reasons I like to do podcasts is I learn so much. Um, and just to acknowledge, I'm a wimpy coffee drinker. I drink a little bit, I drink half and half decaf with hazelnut. I don't like Starbucks coffee. Sorry, and hopefully I won't get into any problems for saying that, but it's always too bitter for me,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what the blend. Really,
Mm-hmm.
most restaurant coffee I don't care for. But anyway, so how should we look at coffee? I'm sure there are divisions. So start my education, please.
All right. Well, as I said, you stated you know nothing about coffee. This is where I started from 10 or 12 years ago. I knew nothing other than I didn't like it. Um, so essentially, what we drink in America, is an Arabica based coffee. So an Arabica bean. And that is really the only thing that gets marketed in this country. And you'll see on packaging, you will hear in commercials saying that our coffee is made from 100% Arabica beans. Well, it's interesting because Arabica beans are only one of four genetic species in the coffee family. The rest of them, and I'll discuss those a little bit in a moment, have been pushed aside by the American marketing machine. And you might have tasted a difference. Let's say if you had an espresso in the United States made by somebody and an espresso made in Italy. It could be made with the same machine, the same type of water, and yet it will be a remarkable difference in mouthfeel and taste to you. And partially that's because we're using Arabica beans only in this country, and in much of Europe, they will use a blend of different gene species in order to achieve what I'll call sort of a house profile. You know, sort of like a house wine kind of thing. That's that basic thing that everybody recognizes as coming from this place.
Right.
So we have Arabica beans, and Arabica beans make up 52% of the world production. And what I'll tell people is that you may or may not like the taste profile of an Arabica bean. Now, Arabica is divided into two categories, one more bitter, one a little bit less bitter. So, but where you get Arabica is when you're drinking it, you'll get it on the front of the tongue if you're drinking it black. And that's where the acid is hitting. Arabica beans tend to have a fairly low pH. It can range from the fours into the low fives. And why that's important is your body's pH is a 7. So anything that is significantly less than 7, you'll start to notice it when you're drinking it. Again, it becomes acidic in the mouth. It could start your stomach to start rumbling. And that's why you see, no, you've been in a Starbucks, you've been in other places, Mark. What you'll see there is people either ordering drinks with milk and sugar in them, or if they get black coffee, you see them pour some into the trash and they'll fill it up with milk and sugar. Milk and sugar tends to block the acid receptors on the front of the tongue. And in most cases, the people who are drinking that coffee prefer something that's a lower acidic coffee or a higher pH.
Mm-hmm.
And we found in tests over many years that about 50% of the public likes the more acidic type of coffee, being Arabica, but about 50% of the public likes what a genetic species of bean that's called Robusta. And up until Robusta was regularly sold in blends in this country up until, essentially the end of the Vietnam War, because what ended up happening had nothing to do with the war, but Vietnam, who was a major coffee producer, was looking to create more exports. So what they did is they planted a lot of what we call low-grade Robusta in places where it shouldn't grow. Not so much that it can't grow, but it shouldn't be grown there. And you ended up with a very, very cheap, uh, poorly grown, poorly processed Robusta coffee that got dumped on the market. And almost instantaneously, everybody just said Robusta in general is a terrible coffee. But the fact is, Robusta has a much higher pH level. So it can be, high fives into the low sixes, which is very close to the body pH. So when you drink Robusta, you're not getting the front of the tongue acid bath that you do from some types of Arabica. It becomes more of a back palate, and it's sort of much smoother. I sort of compare it to, look, if you spend $100 on a bottle of whiskey, you may, on the top shelf, you may get a $3 bottle of whiskey on the bottom shelf that could be made out of the same things, but one is going to be, oh, wow, that's something. The $100 one's going to be smooth. And that's essentially what Robusta is. It's a smooth coffee, and it's much easier for people to drink black because you don't need the milk and sugar to mask it on your tongue. But it also doesn't mess with your stomach. I remember years ago when when I drank some Arabica coffees, my stomach would start to rumble fairly soon thereafter, and that's not pleasant.
It also could be related to drinking coffee on an empty stomach too. But
Well, it could, but again, when you have something that Arabica beans where they are in the pH of the high fours, low fives, you're just adding that much more acid. Whereas if you have Robusta, you're not adding acid to your system.
got it. So that's two, Robusta and Arabica.
Yeah. And they make up, 95% or so, 95% of the world production. The other two are, there's a Excelsa. Now, Excelsa tends not to be a drink alone kind of coffee, but it's used in Europe and other places as, I'll call it, patching coffee. So if you're trying to create that house blend, beans from year to year will vary in taste and aroma, just like wine will, grapes grown in the same vineyard from year to year. So Excelsa, when you're putting a blend together, let's say for your espresso, a little bit of Arabica, a little bit of Robusta, get the front of the tongue, the back of the tongue. What essentially Excelsa is going to do is help tie those things together. And if there's any sort of patchiness in the coffee, like you can't get it quite right from year to year, if you're trying for that house blend, Excelsa can help blend those and kind of patch little holes in the taste profile. And that makes up, 3 to 5% of world production. Because again, it's really not although it's not something typically people just drink by itself. Mm-hmm. The last one is called Liberica. And Liberica was sort of brought back from extinction, or close to extinction, maybe 20, 30 years ago in the Philippines. Now, Liberica, so it's a very low production in terms of quantity type of coffee. The other issue with it is terms of how it's harvested. Now, most coffee grows on bushes, and you can go and, coffee is a bean of a coffee cherry, which grows on the bush, and people go pick them, and the skins the fruit's taken off, and they're dried, and so on. So, I mean, these are things you can pick as you're walking around. Liberica grows on 20 to 30-foot trees. So they'd have to take the ladder up or a picker and actually pick things off of 20 or 30-foot trees. So it just makes it a bit more labor intensive. The interesting thing about this coffee is its flavor profile. It usually starts off in the palate as being smoky. So if you're tasting it after you first brewed it, you get smoky. You'll get sort of the wood, the floor of the forest kind of flavor and aroma from it. And if you let it sit, it sort of changes its profile and mellows about every 5 minutes. It's subjected to oxygen. So like a good red wine, when you open it and let it breathe and it changes over the course of your dinner, Liberica will change just as well. It'll change from smoky and, again, floor bottomy to to mellow and smooth as it sits in the cup. And we found it very interesting in doing coffee tastings with people. A lot of people don't like it in the first 5 minutes because it is too foresty, too bottom of the forest floor. 10 minutes later, they'll try it and they'll love it. Or people who love it because they like that flavor profile, and then it goes away and they'll say, what happened to it? So it's one of those where you can't make instantaneous judgments about it because, like a good red wine subjected to oxygen, it will develop as it sits in the cup. And it makes up less than 1% of world production.
So I have a couple questions for you.
Yep.
Seems like we're at a stopping point with the four.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the impact of the water that you use? You know, there's a lot of different levels of additives, chlorine, that sort of thing. How important is the water in that mix?
In terms of when you're brewing it or when you're processing it?
I'm talking about
Brewing.
brewing it for use.
Yeah, I mean, you want to, for the most part, you want your water to be chemical free. I mean, if you have a water filter, a Brita, or if you're running it through a refrigerator filter, that's good enough. But what you're just trying to do is you're just trying to take the taste of tap water out of the coffee. Now, is that important for every coffee? No. I mean, if you're paying a significant amount per pound for, if you're paying Jamaican Blue Mountain at, whatever, 40, 50, $60 per pound, whatever it is today, or if you're paying for Kona coffee, pure Kona coffee, you're going to want to use purified water. Buy it in a jug from the store for 89 cents, use your refrigerator, use a Brita, something like that. If you're buying chock full of nuts off the bottom shelf, $3 for a 3-gallon can, it really doesn't matter what water you use. The coffee is going to be $3 coffee.
Right. What about buying pre-ground coffee as opposed to grinding it yourself?
Preference would be, again, if you have premium beans, and when I mean premium beans, they are grown, and no matter whether they're Arabica, whether they're Robusta or other, when I say premium, they're grown at the right altitude. If they need shade grown, they're shade grown. They're processed using excellent techniques. Bad beans are taken out because, much like the bad apple can spoil the barrel, a bad bean can spoil a whole brew of coffee. So when you buy a bag of coffee and you look through whole beans, if you see one that's in there is it a color that it shouldn't be, toss it before you grind it. Now, what you're doing when you're grinding is you're releasing flavors and aroma, essentially. Pre-ground coffee, I mean, look, pre-ground is convenient. I get that. And for a lot of coffees, it's not going to matter whether you get whole bean, whether you get pre-ground. But for premium, essentially what happens when all types of coffee oxidize. So I remember the days when Whole Foods would have barrels of coffee with lids on them and you could take them out. Now that went away since the pandemic. But you'd walk past the coffee aisle and you'd smell all the coffee. Well, the coffee's oxidizing, which means whatever you're smelling, you're not getting in the cup. When you grind it, because there's more surface area then, oxidation increases. So the life of a whole bean, I mean, the premium life of a whole bean coffee is going to be significantly longer than that of pre-ground. Okay.
What about the fineness of the grind? That probably makes a difference, or does it?
It depends on the machine that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for espresso machines, you're going espresso grind, very, very, it's like powder. When you get up into French presses, for instance, you're going for a much coarser grind because you essentially don't want the grinds coming up through the mesh press. Mm-hmm. Now they both make great cups of coffee, but again, your grinding method or your degree of grinding is going to depend on whether you're using a pour over, a drip, an espresso machine, a French press, or something of the like.
Mm-hmm. Talk about espresso and how it's made and how it's different. Obviously, it's a stronger coffee. And I got back from Brazil recently, and their cups were espresso sized cups for regular cups of coffee. Um, so, but talk a little bit about espresso and what makes that different.
It's essentially the brewing method. I mean, it's the same beans that you can use for anything else. What you're doing is you're fine grinding it, and what the espresso machine is doing is forcing the proper temperature water through it under pressure. And that's essentially the difference. So what you're getting is a much more, well, obviously a lot less liquid, a lot more dense flavor because it's less liquid, probably the same amount of grinds, let's say you're using for a cup of a pour over, but because it's under pressure and being pushed through, you have that sort of that you feel it's kind of a different profile. It's going to be a stronger profile on your tongue.
Yeah. What about the brewing process and temperature? I would imagine that there are multiple different temperature settings. Just talk about the impact of temperature.
And on an espresso machine, you won't have to worry about it. But if you're doing a pour over, if you're doing something, you really need to have the water 195 to 205 in that range. You don't want to get the water to boiling because water at boiling will start releasing unpleasant acids within the coffee itself. You get it too low, and if you're expecting a cup of coffee in 4 minutes after you start doing a pour over, if you're pouring at 150 degrees, you're just going to end up getting dirty dishwater in the in your cup. So premium extraction temperature for flavor and to sort of keep out the elements that might be less tasty on the tongue is going to be 190 to 205, 195 to 205. Now, obviously, if you're doing cold brew, now for those who don't know what cold brew is, you remember years ago Lipton used to promote sun tea on commercials. Say you take take a big thing of water, you put some tea bags in it, and you let it sit out, and over the course of a day, it will steep into, sun tea. You can do coffee the same way. You can stir coffee into, again, let's say clean water, and you can let it sit. Now, not beans, obviously, ground coffee, but you can let it sit for a period of time, and that's essentially how you're making cold brew. And why some people like cold brew is sometimes they don't even drink it cold, but you can drink it cold or you can reheat it, but you're getting much less bitterness out of the bean when you're using room temperature water for cold brew as you would if you were pouring hot water over it for a regular cup of hot coffee.
I always thought that cold brew was just chilled, brewed regularly, and then chilled. So it's more like a sun tea.
It could be. I mean, cold brew doesn't have any definitions to it, but usually what they're referring to is you're using cold, or let's say room temperature water, to brew the coffee over a period of time. Again, it's the same thing as sun tea, but it's with coffee. So you're letting it sit 6, 10, 12 hours in room temperature water and then filtering it out, and then you have a cold brewed coffee as opposed to cold brewed coffee, which is when you brew the coffee and then pour it over ice and it's cold.
Got it. And how would you package the coffee in that? I'm thinking this equivalent of sun tea. Obviously, you got tea bags that
Mm-hmm.
contain the tea.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use one of those balls, like a tea ball? How do you keep the coffee away from the water itself?
Okay. essentially, we don't want to. Obviously, you want the coffee submerged or fully submerged in the water for a
You just
period of
pour it
time.
in?
So basically what you're doing is you can take any container, obviously it's clean, and you pour in, let's say you could pour in an inch of coffee, ground coffee into it. And then what you're doing is you're pouring, regular water or purified water over top. So let's say 4-to-1 ratio-ish. Okay, so 1 inch to 4 inches type of thing, 1 inch coffee, 4 inches of water. And what you're going to do is the coffee is going to want to float. So you can stir it until it stops floating. A couple of times around. Come back 5 minutes later, it'll be floating again, stir it again a couple of times really quick. Go away, come back 5-10 minutes later, stir it again. By that time, the ground should have hydrated and it should be suspended in the liquid. All right? And then you go away, you can put it in the refrigerator, you can, go away for the day, come back. What you want to do then is you're going to want to filter the coffee, just like you would have with loose tea. So, you get a paper coffee filter, get whatever, pour it through, filters it. You have clean, cold brew coffee at that point.
Got it. What about, let's talk about ground coffee for a moment and the importance of proper storage of the coffee, because probably, I'm guessing the more you seal it, the better it's going to be.
Yeah. This is with all coffees because, again, coffee oxidizes. So proper storage of coffee, especially if you're buying the expensive stuff, is, you want to enjoy the first cup as much as the last cup. So first of all, there's general Arabica is going to oxidize much, much faster than Robusta. And that's, if you walk down the aisle again of Whole Foods and you smelled all that coffee, those are all Arabica beans. Whether it's called Colombian, whether it's called French roast, whether it's called, whatever the locale or the roast type it is, it's one type of an Arabica bean. Okay? And you could smell the coffee from an aisle or 2 aisles away. It's oxidizing, as I said before. Now, Robusta oxidizes very slowly. So when it's sitting by itself after it's roasted, when it is in a package, when you're brewing it, you're not going to get that whole that 2 aisle away or that entire house aroma that you get that might wake you up in the morning. I think that was a Maxwell House or Folgers commercial years ago. Or the smell of coffee woke people up. Well, Arabica will do that. Robusta won't, because it doesn't oxidize very quickly, so it stays very close to even the cup when you're brewing it. You can smell it if you sort of go down and do this, but you're not smelling it from the next room over. So one of the things but no matter whether it's oxidizing fast or slow, there's some basic rules for storage of coffee. Don't put it in a clear container and set it out on a counter. Light increases the oxidation factor, as will air. So the more times you open the container, the more it's going to oxidize and degrade. Third, or last, or whatever it was, don't put it in the freezer or refrigerator.
A lot of people do that, I think.
I know. Refrigerator will cause mold because you're taking coffee in and out and you're getting condensation on it. When you take it in and out of the freezer, you start getting very quick defrosts, and then you're putting it back in and the temperature keeps changing. The other thing about the freezer is that coffee is a great it absorbs odors remarkably well. So if you start storing coffee in the freezer, I would not store it in the bags that they're sold in, because if you also have fish in the freezer, your coffee is going to smell like fish. Tastes like fish too, most likely. So basically what you want to do is, if you have a bag of coffee, look, the way I do it, I just cut the top off the bag, you scoop out what you want, be it whole bean or ground, roll the bag back up again. I just take a rubber band and put a rubber band around the bag so no more air can get in, and then put it in a dark cabinet.
Okay.
So the best storage: stay away from light, stay away from cold refrigerator, freezer. Don't keep opening it. If you have ground coffee, use it fast. You really should use it faster than if you grind it yourself.
Got it. When you travel, has your love and appreciation for coffee affected your choice of travel destinations? And have you gone to some places that are more famous for their coffee? And, you know, as an uninformed person, I'm thinking Colombia and Juan Valdez. So have you done some coffee related travel? And if not, where are some of the coffee hot coffee spots?
Coffee
Sorry.
hotspots,
Yeah.
as opposed to cold coffee spots. Okay.
Yeah.
I have again with the pandemic over the past few years and just our general business model, we tend not to do a lot of travel. Now we buy from very small farms. So, and I can Starbucks, the Dunkin' Donuts of the world, they don't even bother for the most part with the farms that we go to in terms of buy the coffee. They need millions and billions of beans, both of those. And we can talk about why you might get bitter in a while if you want to. But we're doing local farmers, and these are not big corporations. They're not people who have tens or hundreds of acres. They are small, generally small types of producers. And one of the things, if you actually go to one of these farms, first of all, it's usually, where so and so is farming. They're going to point up the mountain someplace. It's up there. You want coffee grown at altitude at certain levels. And when you get there, because you are a prospective customer of theirs, they're going to treat you like royalty. They're going to, they'll, if you ate meat, they'll slaughter the goat and cook that for you, or whatever. But so what do you do then if you don't like the coffee? If it's not grown properly or not processed properly, or there's something else with it, you feel almost guilty walking away from this small family, or this family farm who has just rolled out the red carpet for you. And that's hard to do, quite frankly. So we basically have people sending us samples of different coffees, and we evaluate based on the sample and trying to be influenced by, for the most part, by surroundings of the farm.
Got it. So no particular tourist recommendations to do a coffee travel junket.
Well, you could do Costa Rica, you can do Brazil, you can do Colombia, you can do. We get coffee from not only places like that, I mean Mexico as well at the southern end, but Vietnam has a tremendous coffee culture. And again, a lot of our Robusta coffee comes from Vietnam, in addition to India, and Uganda. Now we get some as well. But I mean, basically, you're looking at that certain latitude, longitude. I forget which one it is. That goes sort of around near the equator on both sides. And there's some places in there that are interesting. You could do Laos or Cambodia, or Vietnam, or some other places. Do I have specific recommendations? Not particularly. It's going to depend on what kind of coffees you like. Like if you sent me on a coffee tour of South America, where it's almost all Arabica beans, not going to do anything for me because I'm a Robusta person. I don't like the acid. I don't like the reflux that comes with it. And for me, and a lot of people who like Robusta, after you drink a cup of black Arabica, I feel like I need to scrape it off my tongue afterwards.
Yeah.
It feels like it's leaving a film on the tongue. But Robusta, again, doesn't do that. But again, 50% of the public tends to like Arabica, 50% Robusta. So travel destinations are going to depend upon, I would think, your curiosity level and the types of coffee you like to drink. If you're going to make
Mhm.
it a coffee only kind of excursion or a coffee based kind of excursion.
You know, um, back to the Starbucks, it seems like just from hearing people's special attachment to their type of drink. Double latte, blah, blah, blah. It has very little, it seems to have very little to do with the coffee itself. It's
Right.
all about the flavorings and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I bet real coffee aficionados turn their nose up on the typical Starbucks drinker.
I don't think, I wouldn't say, I'm not to the point of turning my nose up on people for their preferences. But if you look at the evolution of Starbucks over the course of time, they went from selling primarily black coffee, and some people would put milk and sugar in it, to selling, right, the complex, I'll call it the crappuccino. How much crap can you possibly put into this cup kind of thing? And even George Schultz, who was once and again is head of Starbucks Coffee, said a number of years back, "We're not a coffee company anymore. We're a milk and sugar company." Starbucks started off as when you were a customer of Starbucks when they first started, when you went in and you'd have your choice between three different sizes of coffees, essentially. And most people bought coffee, and then they might add milk or sugar to it, if they wanted to. But they kind of evolved from, the short, the tall, and the grande from early on now to, grande, Trenta, whatever is, the 80-ounce big gulp version of whatever they're selling. So their business has essentially shifted from coffee business to now what the president of Starbucks basically says is a milk and sugar business, because they basically use more milk and sugar than they do coffee these days. Whether it be, and it's not people pouring milk into their own coffee. This is I like to jokingly reference to, it's when people go in and buy the 45-ounce crappuccinos that do have shots of espresso in there, but essentially, that might make up 4, 5, 6 ounces of the container, but mostly it's all milk and sugar and other crap that they throw into it.
Yeah. Is there a Bible for coffee? The reference book that's all aficionados go to as their primary resource.
I don't think so. Not that I know of.
Any good books that you're aware of?
I know the founder of our company, and I wish I remembered the title, Len Brault, Lenbrault, has written a good book on coffee that is for sale on Amazon. I quite frankly cannot, to my whatever reason, I cannot remember the name to that book.
Well, we'll look it up and we'll put it down in the show notes.
Okay.
What else would you tell us for somebody like me who's curious about it? What else is there to know?
I think it's about trying to find your particular taste, And again, I sort of say this through experience, being someone who just detested coffee growing up, to someone who now just basically drinks black coffee. And I'd say that kind of switch is rare, but it's only rare because I didn't know what else was out there in terms of bean types, in terms of roast types. Even when you go into the Arabica bean, there are basically two main branches that offer this Arabica tree, theoretical family tree. There is Arabica typica, which is really acidic. I mean, that's the stuff where you're drinking and it's like, oh man, this must be like one step above battery acid. And then you have the other branch, which is Arabica Bourbon, which is still a little bit on the front palate, but much more in the middle of the tongue. So you don't get all that acid. So, I mean, one of the things that I suggest people to do is to start thinking about what they don't like about coffee. Or do you think it's the roast level? Do you think it's the caffeine? what is it that you don't, is it the acid? Or is it combinations of those things? Because it's not necessarily coffee, but might be the type of coffee. One of the things we used to run coffee seminars for people. Again, it's the same one I took when I first started. And I was giving these seminars with Len for many years after I became an investor. And what we find are people who say, I can't drink caffeine. Caffeine gives me the jitters. Yeah, maybe it does. Maybe it
Could
doesn't.
also
I
be
said,
the
well,
sugar.
we're trying. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, it could be the sugar. But let's eliminate the sugar for the moment. You say I can't drink coffee. It gives me the jitters. It makes my heart pound. It does whatever. Well, you know what? It actually might be the caffeine, but it might not. One of the things that you noticed in terms of your Starbucks adventure when you said it was bitter, once you get past a certain point in terms of roasting beans, it can turn bitter. So the beans that you had may have been over roasted. And for people who we've heard have the jitters or make the heart makes it go, when you over roast a coffee bean, the chemically to your body, it's like MSG would be. So if MSG gets you jittery or gets the heart running, if you drink coffee that has been over roasted, the burn can actually mimic what MSG would do to you. And people will say, you get people saying, well, I like bold coffee. Well, what does that mean? Do you want to?
What about, I don't want to miss this. What about decaf and the process to decaffeinate coffee? Has to have an impact.
There are two main processes for decaffeinating coffee. They're both natural, so to speak. The most common, and I won't name it, but it's essentially using the extracts or derivatives of plants in order to extract the caffeine from the coffee. Now, you think, okay, well, that's all natural and that's what it is. But, it's essentially the same type of chemical elements that go into like antifreeze and things like that. But it's taken from plants, so it's all natural. Now, if you're looking for the better decaf, and it's just usually a little bit more expensive, it's called water processed decaf. Or you might see Swiss water process, same thing. But what's being done there is you will brew, let's just say, a vat of coffee, and it could be the cheapest coffee you can find. It doesn't really much matter. You will then take the good unroasted coffee beans, dump them, and let them soak in the cheap brewed coffee. And what that does is that extracts the caffeine out of the beans into the vat of already brewed coffee. It's kind of an osmosis kind of thing, So basically what you're doing is you're using already brewed coffee to suck the caffeine out of the unroasted coffee beans. You take them, you dry them out, you put them through the roaster, and then you have decaf, Swiss water or water processed decaf.
Got it.
So there's sort of what they call the natural way, which is like a solvent, but it's plant-based, so it's natural. Then there's Swiss water or water processed. Always suggest using that one because, again, it's just one liquid coffee pulling caffeine out of other coffee. The only downside is that the solvent, the all-natural one, you can get the caffeine down to 2 to 3%. So decaf is not 100% decaf. For the solvent one, maybe 97%. For the water processed, you'll leave about 5 to 7% of the caffeine in the beans itself. So you're never going totally caffeine free with coffee because you just can't get it all out.
Got it. So let's wrap up here and give people some resources. What's the coffee that the company that you're on the board of, and give the website for that.
It's Lens Coffee, again, LENSCOFFE. I mean, one of the things I like to point out is what makes Lens Coffee unique is we are the only business in the United States that imports, sells in single origin or in blends all four species of the coffee I mentioned before: Arabica, Robusta, Liberica, and Excelsa. So you can buy those as standalone beans, a bag of Robusta from Vietnam, or you can have it blended with Arabica or with other things. So we have house brands and we sell single bean varietals, but we're the only people in the country where you can buy any or all of the four varietals. And
Got
it
it.
is lenscoffee.com.
Okay. And
So
if somebody wants to contact you as an enthusiast and reach out to you, how can people best reach you?
that is a good question.
How about email? How about email?
That's fine. How about my first initial and last name? So it's Martuza, MMARTUZA at yahoo.com.
Got it. Well, okay. I want to thank Mike for joining me on the Outmarket.pro podcast today. This was fascinating, and going from no information to a moderate amount of information for me has been rewarding, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. If you did enjoy the episode, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can hear about or find out about new episodes. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Mike, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time. And